Hi everybody. Hope you're all well. Yeah, I'm Jacob. It's nice to meet you. Because we've got a nice small group, if it's all right with you guys, after I've done my little introduction, it'd be nice just to get to know you a little bit. Even if it's just sort of where you're based, because we've got some people from Spain, which is amazing. Um, so I'm Jacob. I am the strategic lead for sort of behaviour within the Wellspring Academy Trust. I work through Positive Regard, which is our school improvement outreach service, if you like, which I'll explain a little bit more about as we go through. But my role is brilliant and creative and strange. Um, I get to guide, support, and advise in everything to do with behaviour, which is quite often involves other things, as I'm sure you guys are well aware. Um, our trust is made up of about 31 schools now, so that's quite a few. And I get to go across all of those, supporting them with their journey with behaviour. It's made up of just over half, probably a little bit more than half, specialist provision. So that's everything from generic special schools to PMLD settings and colleges, SCMH special schools, alternative provisions, and then the other half mainstream primary, mainstream secondary. So there's a real variety. For those of you that are in the UK or know the UK, we're based from the bottom of Lincolnshire, so Spalding, Grantham, all the way up through Lincolnshire into northeast Lincolnshire, so Grimsby, and across into Scunthorpe, and then Yorkshire, so South Yorkshire. We've got schools in Barnsley, which is where I'm from, if you've not figured that out already. Schools in Barnsley, Kirklees, West Yorkshire, so Leeds, got quite a few schools in Leeds, and then in North Yorkshire as well. Fingers crossed I haven't missed any of those out. Like I said, my job is to get across them all and support them with whatever they need, which is great because I mean, one day I can be sat with executives talking about really sort of grand academization, strategy, procedure, policy, and then the next day I might be sat in a school getting spat at in a restraint. It's very varied, shall we say. That's probably a fair way of saying it. My role before the one that I'm in now was similar, but in a sort of isolated cluster of schools in the north. I worked in what's now called Springwell Leeds. 5 years ago, I got offered the opportunity to go and support them opening up. They didn't exist 5 years ago. There was 5 or 6 sites across the city of Leeds, old Prues, which were, this is where I'm going to really have to stop myself swearing. They were really bad. The provision that was on offer for those children and young people is not great. If you look online, you'll see the inspection and newspaper articles that support my want to swear a little bit there. They were the kind of place where the adults were smoking with the kids. So that kind of gives you that's not a joke. It kind of gives you a clue as to the offer that the children were getting. And my job was to go in and support them to go from 5 or 6 sites, not very good offer, to 3 fantastic new buildings. Those buildings are now housing about 110 to 120 children, all with the HCPs, with SCMH on there. And they went from 50 to 60 members of staff to 200 and something overnight, and there wasn't 100 and something specialist staff lying around in Leeds waiting for a job. So it was a really intense process of going from that what was to what is. And the beautiful thing was I was there to support them through process data, systems, training and development, everything. But I was there the next day to help them with it as well. I wasn't just doing, I get the irony because I'm just going to say hi and disappear today. But I wasn't just walking in, delivering some training. I was sat in the classroom with them the next day. So I was there based across those schools. And then as the time went by, as the years went by, helped the executive principal take on some other schools in that area. He's now got Springwell Harrogate, which is an alternative provision, Green Meadows, which is a generic special school, Penny Fields, which is PMLD, and most recently Forest Moor School, which is a CMH school based up in the middle of the North Yorkshire moors. Very interesting, about 1,000 yards away from a live RAF base. So as you can imagine, that's fun. Pre to all that, I worked in a SCMH special school for about 8 or 9 years. I started as a teaching assistant. I was in the classroom for about 2 or 3 years, and then I came out and joined what we called at the time the engagement team, even in a specialist provision, we still had children that couldn't access the classroom. It just wasn't right. It just didn't work. The whole offer, the chalk and talk, the actual room itself, it just wasn't working. So the engagement team was designed to do literally what it says on the tin and engage them in school, engage them in more practical and physical elements of learning. If you had come into the school at the time, you would have seen a sports hall plastered with phonics sounds, because we had key stage 3 and 4 children that were at P levels of reading and they didn't want to read Biff, Kip and Chipper, and they'd show you that quite aggressively sometimes. So we merged the two, the P lead and the English lead merged phonics and sport, a lot of research, and active phonics was born. And they actually went around the country training people in that. But like most things, funding was cut and they ended up not being able to do much of that. It then led to me being very lucky to be sort of invested in, and I became a forest schools instructor, mountain bike instructor, Duke of Edinburgh lead, and all this. And then suddenly there was an outdoor team. There was a team of us that were sort of facilitating all these wonderful outdoor things for all of the most vulnerable children in that area at the time, which I've got some of my fondest memories from, because you've got some of the seemingly most challenging, vulnerable children, the ones that are in the gangs that are doing X, Y, and Z. When you take them into the middle of the moors or in a forest and there's no walls, and you give them the opportunity to be a child, quite often you see some magical things. So I did that for quite a while. There was a little bit more to it than riding bikes, building dens and setting fires. For a lot of those children, the social and emotional and mental health elements, we had to look at that first, and being outside was a great way to do it. Once I'd played outside for a couple of years, I came back and joined what we call our care team. Now, our care team in some of our specialist provisions is what you might translate as a pastoral team, a behaviour support team, or an inclusion team. And that's where I started to really reignite my love and interest for behaviour and start to explore some of the stuff that we're going to explore shortly in more depth. It's the reason I went to that school in the first place, which I'll get to in a second. The care team's job was to be proactive, reactive, and piece things together afterwards, in a sense, which is something we'll gloss over really quickly today. My job was to know children so well I could be there before that thing was going to happen and prevent it. Ultimately, humans are really complex, so even if I was, sometimes that wasn't enough. So I was there to help to catch them when things went wrong, and then piecing things back together after they had done as well. So that was kind of where that started. I eventually then went on to sort of supporting little like this outreach. At the time, it was a handful of people in one school doing it in one local authority. Now, Positive Regard as a service, which I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Positive Regard is an outreach school improvement service that's based with, on the edge, bolted onto our trust. It's no longer 3 people in one local authority. It is 75 specialists based in schools inside, outside of our trust, across the country, that will support in areas of behaviour and culture, SEND, teaching, learning and mental health and wellbeing. And last year we worked in nearly 500 schools, or just over, in about 30 local authorities. It is all about getting into as many places, not making as much money as we can, because we're all doing the job. Everybody's based in a school doing a job. All that money that gets, so if somebody goes and does a piece of work in another school, it goes back into their school to support their school, not into their pocket, which is important for us. So that's changed drastically, which has enabled me to be sat in front of you today, which is incredible. And I'm part of that team, that Positive Regard team, that's sort of steering that group of specialists around the country to try and influence the system a little bit. Previous to all of that, I worked in a mainstream primary school in Barnsley for about 3 years, in a pretty rubbish area, literally just like 30 seconds away from where I grew up and lived as a child. So, yeah, that's not a nutshell, is it? I probably wasted a bit too much time there. Maybe I like the sound of my own voice a bit too much, potentially, but hey ho. It'd be really, really useful for me just to just dead quickly, if you could tell me your name, where you're based, or what school or what kind of setting you're in. That'd be really useful for me, so I can kind of gauge the group, if that's all right. If I pick you, because otherwise we'll be waiting for somebody to stick their hand up. That'd be probably the best way to do it, potentially. We'll go for one of the Davids first, because there's 2 of them.
All right, I'll go because actually I've got to pop off for like 10 minutes and then I'll pop back on. I'm actually Luciana. I work with David, obviously, he's my director, and we're based at an international school in Spain. I was the head of primary. I'm now the head of secondary, covering a maternity cover. So that's, I'm from London, been there for 10 years, and yeah, that's it really.
Thank you. That's really useful. David, do you want to go? Has that covered you?
Go on. I am the real David Russell. Yeah, so I work with Luciana in Castellón, which is on the Mediterranean coast, just an hour north of Valencia, a couple of hours south of Barcelona. I've been here, this is coming my 6th year here in Castellón. I've been in Spain for more than 20 years. Our school setting is, you know, we're an independent school, so we're a private school, British school, all through. So we've got children from 1 year old until up to 18. We're British curriculums. We do international GCSEs, we call it national curriculum. Most of our kids are Spanish, and 80% of them are Spanish. And then we have a mix with 20 different nationalities in the school. So although English is their academic language, if you like, there's a lot of exposure to it. They don't get English outside of schools for those issues. Although we're a private school, I'd say we're fully comprehensive, and which probably in terms of, you know, the type of children that we have in our school. And I think that's probably enough from me.
Thank you. That is useful. That's great. Thank you. Michelle, do you want to go next? Are you still there?
Me. You can't hear me.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, we've got you.
Good. Yeah, sorry about the blank screen. I cracked my my Mac. I'm based in Southall in London, which is in West London. And Southall is a very Indian area, so all the signs are in Hindi as well as English, and we've got a real diverse community at our school. It's a gorgeous little 2-form entry school with a lot of Indians, Pakistani mainly.
Perfect. Thanks for that. That's really useful. Susan, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Sue. I'm Deputy Principal at Sawston Village College, which is an 11 to 16 state village college in Cambridgeshire, just south of Cambridge. So we're fully comprehensive, yeah, just kind of traditional academic curriculum school, but we kind of have a real pride in the arts and developing kind of personal development side of the child. But yeah, kind of pretty bog standard.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, have we got Robert as well?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Robert Obo. I work at Parsons Academy School in Essex. I've been here for about 5-6 years now. And basically my deputy head, vice principal, told me about this coaching, and I thought, okay, yeah, let me jump on it. I'm very interested in how I can develop my understanding of behaviour and how to deliver sort of what do they call it? Positive regard, unconditional positive regard, and what that looks like moving forward across the whole school. So in all aspects of school life, and how that can be best implemented. So yeah. Wow,
small world. We're working with Passmores at the minute. There's a handful of you guys coming up to one of our schools, and I'm going to be down at yours on the 13th, I think. So small world. Thank you for that. That's useful. I'll try and catch you if you're there, mate. Nice to see you.
No problem. That'd be great. Good.
Right, I'll get cracked on because I'm conscious of time. I should be able to click my screen and share some bits with you. I've done some of the starting bits. That's not the one. Oh, that is the one. There you go. Somebody give me a nod so you can see some sort of PowerPoint. Yeah, great. That's wonderful. I'm hoping that I get carried away with stuff like this because I'm really passionate about it. So I'm going to try my best not to try and squeeze an inset day into 45 minutes because that is my temptation. What I'm really hoping is that I can spark some interest so that you can really dive into some stuff with Luke next time round about kind of, well, how does that actually look, and what can that, how does that work for us, and what does that mean for us in Spanish school, and all that sort of really detailed nitty gritty. I'm kind of hopefully going to spark your interest about proactivity around some of this stuff, if that's all right. Hence the lovely quote from Desmond Tutu. My first question really is why, and I'm going to do an activity with you to kick us off, and it's sort of the only activity, so you're going to have to just stick with this one and give it a little bit of thought. I use the chat rather than faffing around with anything else interactive. There's a question. There's two versions of this activity, and I'll give you the easiest one because it's 4:30 on a Thursday night, and I'm sure that you're looking for a minimal work at this point. So what I want you to really quickly think of is words and expressions to describe the sort of care you'd want for your loved one when they're not with you. All right, and stick them in the chat. So if you were in a room, you'd be talking to each other about things like listened to, respect, stuff like that. Those generally pop up, but try and be a little bit more specific to you and your own loved one. That can be a child, a goldfish, a grandparent. I'm really not too fussed as long as it's a real thing for you, something that you care about. I don't want them to be looked after when they're not with you. If you pop them in the chat really quickly, what we'll do then is we'll just unpick a little bit of why I'm asking you those questions, and what they mean to you. So brilliant, we've got some popping in. That's fantastic. Let me minimize that so I can see a little bit easier. Okay. Right. Like I said, this is the only activity, so bear with me and please engage when I start to question you about kind of what they mean. What we'd be doing in person, which I'm going to do with you virtually now, is just ask you to give me what that means or why you've chosen it. Now, there's a reason I'm starting with this stuff, which I'll get to in a second, to get to the sort of science behind why I'm starting with why. It's not just Simon Sinek's thing. There's a bit of science behind why I'm going to do this. But to kind of deepen the why behind me asking you the question, I'm really interested as to why you've chosen one of those. So if I go for kindness and humour, which is Sue, what made you choose those? And if you were smart enough to figure out that this is a bit of a trick activity, what would kindness and humour look like in your practice? I'm not sure if you picked up on that, Sue. I was asking you a question.
Sorry, I was distracted. Why the humour bit, did you say?
Yeah, so I'm just asking. So same for everybody. When I make my way through a couple of the others, I'm checking in with you as to what that means. What does kindness and humour mean to you, and why have you picked it?
I think I put that because I think I was actually thinking of my getting on parents, and if they were being cared, they're up in Newcastle and I'm down here in Cambridge, so I would be depressed to think that people didn't still treat them as people who have a sense of humour, and that they are, as people get older, that they don't lose all sense of who they were when they were younger, I suppose. So yeah, want people to be kind, but also give something that's beyond just basic functional care, I suppose.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Thank you for sharing that personal little bit as well. What else have we got? We've got calmness and cared and understanding from one or both of the Davids. Does one of you guys want to pick those up and just give me a bit of reasoning as to why you've picked those?
Yeah, I went for calmness. I think that with calmness, there's kind of wisdom. There's treating people in the right way. There's emotional stability. There's not reactivity. There's more strategic thinking and proactivity, and saying the right thing at the right time. That's why I went for calmness. I think it's really something that's fundamental in how we interact with each other, or should promote how we interact with each other.
Mega. Thank you for that. What else have we got? Care and patience with their disability, if you don't mind adding a bit to that, Michelle.
Yeah, so my mum is a bit deaf, and she also has macular degeneration, so her eyesight's not amazing, and that obviously affects how she when she's in like busy places like stations and stuff. But she's very sprightly aside from that. But yeah, I always hope that people are kind to her, and if they don't hear her, if they don't, if she doesn't hear them straight away, that they react positively to that, and rather straight. And generally, I'd say people are really, really lovely to her when she's wondering about travelling.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing those. I'm going to pause there and move forward if that's okay. The purpose to me starting with this is just because if this stuff's not right, if the values or ethos, your sort of underpinning stuff is not right, then the rest of the stuff that I'll explore with you is probably pointless. Sounds quite blunt, doesn't it? But it's really hard for any of the strategies or theories to really grab hold and work if this sort of underpinning values aren't real and lived and breathed. And it's the same for the children and young people that you're working with. If the stuff that you're saying that you do or believe isn't real and you don't buy into it and it's not genuine, you'll know just as much as I do. The children, young people will see straight through you. And there's science behind it. So what I'm going to walk through with you really briefly over the course of the next sort of half an hour is some neuroscience behind why relationships make the difference and how they link into sort of behaviour practices and stuff. The neuroscience I'll link to that authentic care it's called neuroception. So neuroception is your ability to be able to sense within somebody else whether they're sort of genuine, trustworthy, predictable. The purest form of it you'll get if you hand baby over to grandma for the first time. They'll go, because they don't know, that sort of subconscious sensor of whether that person's safe and trustworthy goes off. The alarm bells start to ring. And children and people who you'll be working with have that inside them. And if they don't believe that it's real, genuine, trustworthy, blah, 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 or if there's that unpredictability and it's then they're going to have a heightened sense of neuroception if I've had that adversity or trauma or unpredictability in life. So you've got to believe it. It's got to be real is the key of it. I'm fortunate to get around schools all over, and every school has a set of values that are stuck up in reception, on the website. We're nurturing, kind and caring, or whatever it says. But when you walk in and the receptionist growls at you, where do you park your car? And then you can see an adult screaming at a 10-year-old on the corridor. Suddenly you start to question whether they are nurturing, kind and caring, or whatever those values are. So it's important for them not to be just laminated. It's important for them to be lived and breathed, which is one of the key points that I'm making at the start of this session. I have started using a bit of a boat metaphor, which I'm going to give you, but you'll have to bear with me, because some people think I'm just a bit weird. If you're in a boat and you're all rowing the same direction, so this is about shared values more than anything. Authentic care isn't about being the perfect human every day, but if your shared values, if you're all rowing the same direction, even if the sea gets rough and rocky, if you have a bad day with that tough class, or the landscape in education's hard, if you're all rowing the same direction, it's easy if you're having a tough day because everybody else is working with you. Whereas if you're rowing the opposite direction to everybody else, you'll quickly burn out and probably get thrown overboard. Again, a bit of a daft metaphor, but hopefully you can pick up where I'm going with that one in sort of relation to having that real lived and breathed why and genuine authentic care and values for somebody. Now there is another, where's my slides gone? Are my slides still in front of your face at this point? Yeah. Let me get rid of these. We've talked about these already. I'll come back to them. There's another value that's important for me to share with you, which is this. This is why we call positive regard. Now, some of you have heard of this before. Unconditional positive regard comes from a guy called Carl Rogers, who you can see on the screen. And this is one of the only other values sort of things I'll mention to you. We value it so much, we named the service after it. It's a theory. Came from in the 50s and 60s. Carl Rogers was a client-centered therapist, and he was working with extreme offenders, and they were finding it very tricky to see past the offence. So they were seeing a rapist or a murderer, not a human being, which I can imagine is really hard. Like if you've got somebody that committed an extreme offence sat in front of you, They coined the phrase unconditional positive regard, and one of its purest forms is removing judgment. So seeing them as a person first, not the label or the behaviour or the offence in that circumstance. It's not only hard in that circumstance because of the extremeness of it, but because of the way that the human brain and body works. You're naturally very judgmental for lots of reasons that we ain't got time to dive into. As much as I want to control, I can't control. You've all judged me. I've not met any of you before. You're judging me now based on the last 10, 15 minutes and based on your own experiences. As much as I'd love to be able to control that, I can't. What does that look like practically then? Just to make this a little bit more relevant, hopefully. Well, the child that kicks you every day isn't the kicker. The child that absconds isn't the absconder. The pupil that lives on the worst street around the corner isn't that. It's James, it's Lily, it's a person first, not that piece of behaviour or label or statement. Yes, some of those things are really important that we need to know about them, but it shouldn't become them and it shouldn't define them is the key. So removing judgment and seeing people first is one of the key bits from unconditional positive regard. That doesn't mean that children just get away with things. Then I'll keep revisiting this over the next 10 minutes. Positive regard, relational practice, proper trauma-informed practice does not involve no boundaries, no rules, no routines. But there's a bit of a misconception about all that stuff going on. I recently reread some of Carl Rogers' work, and there's a really lovely quote in it that says, I care, not I care because, thus and so. So I care about that person regardless of that action. I care because of the kind of person I am, not because of what they've done. There's no conditions of worth attached to that. So I'll give you an example of your own child. They swore at you, you wouldn't stop loving them, would you? You'd be angry, annoyed, upset, frustrated, but you wouldn't stop loving them. Now, what I'm not suggesting with unconditional positive regard or relational practice is that you must love the children like you love your own child, because that's not what I'm saying. But they must know that you're bothered, that you care. You must invest in them, and they must see some of those things for you to be able to truly recognise the power of some of the stuff that we're going to bang on about. I'll give you some really practical examples of unconditional positive regard from my days working in a specialist provision. If I get bitten at the end of Thursday night and I haven't had a chance to kind of pick that up yet, I'm stood at the front of the school Friday morning with a smile on my face because I genuinely care. Nobody goes to work to be bitten, even in a special school, but I am choosing to work in a school where it's more likely that happens, and I'm working with really distressed, challenging, vulnerable young people. I'm stood at the front of school, authentically smiling because I really care and I'm bothered, and I'm greeting them, and we're walking through the building, and then I'm probably picking it up with them from last night. So there's still challenge and expectation, but I'm doing it with a smile on my face. I'm not having the life of the child because I know that actually my interactions with them are more impactful than me whacking them metaphorically with a stick, for want of a better way of saying it. Is that making some sort of sense? Yeah, good. Your why, so your motivation, I would have asked you if we'd have got time, what's your why? Why are you here? I don't mean in the training, because you've all chosen to be here, which I'm very grateful for. I mean, why do you work in education? Why the school that you're in? That's got to be real too. And it can evolve. My why's changed a lot in the last 4 months because of that. You know, it was this previously. This was my life up to 4 months ago. And my why, if I was thinking about education, was I wanted to be the person to give the child or the class the strategies to be able to manage things differently next time. When I first started, now it's very different. It's a little bit more, I want to make schools places where I'd be happy to leave my daughter. So there's a little bit of a different angle where I'm coming from with that sort of stuff. There's some more why here. So these are some of the stories I'll really quickly give you before we pile into some theoretical challenge from me. There's some children and people on the screen that you may or may not see in the edit, potentially. There's a child on there who's blamed for his sister's death every single day. There's a child on the screen who, when I've walked into their house, you're walking over drugs, broken glass, dog muck, there's doors and windows missing. There's a child on the screen who's sadly taken his own life in the last few years. There's a child on the screen who is a local hero and a lead lifeguard now. There's a child on the screen who is a mechanic at the local garage and there's a child on the screen who's now one of the first students to go to university out of that setting as well. So I'm giving you both sides. There's some of my motivation, because those are some of the relationships that I invested in the most for the longest amount of time. So there's some more why for you there, as well as my personal stuff. What I'm going to do now is poke you a little bit, right? Because it's important for us to challenge ourselves in the way that we think. What you're not going to do is agree with everything that I say in the next 5 minutes. That's okay. You don't need to fall out with me. There's seemingly sort of two polarised approaches in education at the moment. If you know the people that are on the screen, you'll understand where I'm going to go for the next 5 minutes. You've got what you might class as a behaviourist, old school approach, and a relational trauma informed approach. And these two guys are pretty sort of wound up in the media's version of polarizing us when it comes to that sort of stuff. Now, I have an issue with that, because I don't think that's the best way to work in general, standing at one side, shouting at the other, saying that you're rubbish. I think we need to stand back, take a deep breath, and take elements of both approaches to make it work for where you are and the children and people that you're working with. If you look at both articles that are on the screen there, you'll see two completely seemingly polarizing approaches. But actually, if you were to go into both of those environments, I would hope, I know from one of them, because I was based in it, that you would see elements of the good things that come from that approach in both of them. What I am is trying to hopefully convince you that relational practice sits somewhere in the middle between completely off the edge of the trauma-informed relational cliff, where there's a lack of consistency and routine and boundaries and structure, or the other end where you've got sanctions and consequences and complete rigor and, no flexibility at all. I'm hopefully going to draw the good things out of both of those sides and bring them into the middle, because there's great stuff in that rigid behaviourist approach. Things like consistency and structure and routine is really important. But what I'm going to hopefully poke you about is getting the relationships and care and all the stuff that you talked about at the beginning, and hanging them on top of those systems to make them human. Because that's my angle. I want them to be human. I am going to say some things really quickly, though, just to wind you up a little bit about punishment, sanctions, and consequences, if that's all right. Just because I think it's important for you to reflect on them. Does anybody recognise that film? If not, I'm going to be upset, but I'll let you off.
Yes.
Go on, what was that?
Kiss.
Yes, good. Yes, it's Kiss, which is a film filmed in Barnsley in the 1960s. I'm very pleased that you got that. This is just selfish indulgence more than anything, and sometimes I do play the clip, but I'm not going to because of time. In that clip, he starts, the headmaster, and this is a real headmaster and real children, by going, same old faces. And then he goes on to hit them for smoking, so he canes them. Then he says something else, which it goes like, you're going to leave here with your hands ringing, already thinking about the smoking at break. Even when you could hit people, it didn't stop them from doing the thing that you didn't want them to do. My argument about punishment, sanctions, consequences, and systems is quite often fine for 80%, 70%, 90%, depending on your context. But what about those 10, 20, 30, 5 that you've got? What it's not working for them because they're back in detention, back in the red traffic light, back in at break. And I'm sure the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So let's think differently. I'm going to, again, just really quickly say a couple of things just to poke you a little bit about why I think these aren't so effective, specifically for those children. What I'm not saying at this point is rip down your system, because that's not the best thing to do for any school. I'm saying we need to think a little bit differently for the children it's not working for. And some of the stuff that we think differently about, we can use for everybody. Quite often schools have got systems, traffic lights, C systems, things like this. If you was to flip that on its head and use it to manage the adults' behaviour, I don't think that would work very well, because I don't believe you behave as adults the way you do because you're scared of punishments or because you want a reward. If an old lady walked past your window now, and dropped a purse, would you steal it? I'm hoping there's some head shaking somewhere. That's not because you're scared of going to prison or because you want a fiver offer afterwards, is it? Because it's wrong. But where have you got that from? That morality or sense of right and wrong has come from relationships and experiences. And even if those experiences were maybe a little bit shouty or consequency or punishy, does that sit right with you now? It doesn't to me, as somebody that's now got a little fallen fold that might eventually go into a school. I don't want her grass to be flattened, is my argument. I would like her to go into a place where there's understanding, compassion and care, where she understands boundaries, routines, structure, because I've invested in giving her her understanding around the right and the wrong, and not to steal the purse or walk down the corridor properly. I don't want her to go to school and be scared of running down the corridor. I want her to walk down the corridor because she knows that's the right thing to do. But I also don't want her to come home plastered in stickers for walking nicely. And there's a balance there, isn't there, to be had. If I put the traffic light system in the staff room in your school to manage the adults' behaviour, you start the term on green, 10 weeks into the term, you walk into the staff room and see your name's in red. Are you going to think, ooh, I shall change my behaviour? You're not going to, as an adult, well-regulated, well-developed, hopefully, adult, think, my name's in a red circle, I'm going to change what I'm doing. It's the lack of connection to the thing that I have an issue with those systems. You saying C1 to me isn't saying, I'm not happy with you doing that thing. Can you do it differently for me? It's just literally you saying a letter and a number. And we're using that as a scaffold or as a fallback, and there's not much substance to it. Again, what I'm not saying is to rip that away. I'm saying let's be more sophisticated with the way that we use those things. We worked with a school in a big mainstream secondary school that was really struggling to get rid of that system. So, and we said to them, look, if you look at the data, loads of national reports out there, huge percentage of the children that are in your isolation space are on the SEN register, and legally you need to make some adjustments for them. So change the system from consequence 1 to support 1. And then consequence 3, instead of a senior leader in a high-vis jacket turning up and screaming at them, a key worker turns up and supports them. And it's literally the same structure, but we're just reframing it and looking at it a little bit different, from a different angle. 3 more things for you, really quickly. When you're driving home tonight, if you're lucky enough to have a car and drive to a place where you live, if you drive past a speed camera, what do you do when you get to it? Anybody?
Slow down.
Yeah. What about when you've got past it?
Speed up again.
So that's not worked, has it? It can control behaviour, manipulate behaviour for a short amount of time, but long-lasting behaviour change takes investment and relationships and people, is my argument. Three last bits. That was the 4th. Would you punish a child in a wheelchair for not being able to move without the chair? Fingers crossed we'd say no. What about a child that was blind for not being able to read without their braille? Again, hopefully we'd say no. Would you punish a child with communication difficulties for not being able to tell you how they're feeling? We'd probably say no again, but a huge percentage of behaviour that's been smashed through those systems is children that can't communicate. I'm angry, happy, sad, frustrated, don't want to be in the room, I'm anxious, I'm upset. I'm doing that, but I'm doing it by tearing the work up, by storming off, by absconding, by calling you, whatever. I'm communicating something, even if it's something that we're not happy with. Boredom, upset, frustration. It's still quite often a lack of an ability to be able to do that in a socially acceptable way. There's me whinging about systems and stuff. Done. Are you still with me? Good. Right. Why is it important then? Well, you're going to get to be privileged to see. Can you see my squiggles? I'm going to be privileged to get to see some of my really bad drawing at this point. Shane, how am I doing for time? Are we all right? You're muted. Sorry, mate.
So I was trying to find the mute button. You're fine. We've got until 5:30 altogether.
Mega. That's good. I just wanted to do a little bit of a check. So, why it's not just nice to be nice is the point I'll make there. I'm going to dip into a little bit of sort of brain development really briefly, just to really emphasise why relationships make a difference before ploughing through, and I mean steaming through, a model that we use across our schools and that we support other people with across the country. as you've probably picked up, I'm not a neuroscientist. It's quite obvious that, I think, isn't it? But what I'm very lucky to have worked alongside neuroscience. We had actual practicing paediatric neurologist, Dr. Andrew Curran, came and worked in our school. And he's the guy who wrote the big book, the little book of big stuff about the brain. If you're interested in reading it, I'll start to hopefully throw a few in for you to have a little look at. And I was lucky enough, while I worked at one of our schools, to have occupational therapists that came and were starting to give us direct sort of physical sensory strategies for some of the students. And I've been lucky enough to work alongside therapists in some of our settings as well. So then putting that, not just me, but our team, Luke, who you'll meet next time around, putting that into practice, practically, for teaching assistants, for teachers in mainstream X or in primary, whatever, putting that into practice is kind of what you're getting from us. You're getting a bit more of a practical version of some really complex things. This cookie on the screen is a brain, not a cookie. And it's going to quickly represent how a brain grows. And we're going to look through 4 different lenses pretty quickly, if that's okay. So when you're born with billions and billions of neurons inside your head. They're responsible for absolutely everything you can think of. Everything. Walking, talking, sharing, climbing, learning, reading, and anything you can think of. 86 billion. If we think that we understand the brain even slightly, we're having a bit of a laugh. It's just incredible. And I think the more excited and interested you can get about the brain and the body, the better equipped you'll be to deal with life, not just education. Now, to connect those dots, let me get my pen back on. To build a neural pathway, you need what's called a dyadic interaction, which is essentially a fancy word for serve and return. So for me now, 4-month-old baby, she's starting to pick up on all that stuff. And the to and fro, the tennis match of attachment is really taking is setting its roots for us. Now that happens 400 to 500 times, and you get what's called a nice strong neural pathway. You get those synapses starting to connect, and you start to get a healthy brain development pathway, trajectory, whatever you want to call it. Now this here, lens number 1 that you're going to look through with me, you might call that neurotypical. Excuse my spelling and my writing, but that's what you might call that. If you had good enough care, attachment theories, have a little nosy at them if you haven't already, which isn't perfect because there's no such thing. If you had good enough care and there isn't that neurodiversity, which is what we're going to look at next, you might, if you're labeling people, but we're not a fan of labels, remember, you might call that person neurotypical. That's the children who can go, right, my name's in the red traffic light, I'll keep quiet and I'll get on with my work. That's the people who generally the systems will work for, generally. But my argument is the stuff that we're going to work through that works for the others that we're talking about works for the neurotypical children just as well. Let me change my colour. Let's get creative. Number 2, I just mentioned this one really briefly. So neurodiverse, word that's thrown around a lot at the minute. If you have got a condition or need that's affecting the way that you're processing the world, interpreting the world. So if you're on the spectrum, you've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, your ADHD, etc., that is literally, it sounds really unpolitically correct, this, but your brain's wired up a little bit differently, and you're interpreting and processing information in the world in a different way because of that additional need. Is that making sense to everybody? Still with me, yeah? And you'd categorize, label in this sort of diagram that as neurodiverse. Those are the children who you have to legally make those adjustments for. And people sometimes come back to me there and say, well, the world's not going to change for them when they leave school. Well, it should. The world should be making adjustments, just like there's a ramp for people to get into a building. We should be, and the world is getting better at it, but it's still not where it should be in terms of making adjustments to some of these additional needs. Lens number 3, if you want to think about a third lens, if you were going to give it a name, you might say neuroadverse. Somebody that's experienced trauma or adversity, right? We know how potentially, hopefully, some people might have come across the phrase ACEs before, or trauma. But what I'm not going to do is dive into that in loads of depth. But when you experience some sort of adversity or trauma, it literally can start to do this inside the brain and sort of break pathways down or get in the way of them being built, especially if that's in early childhood. when you're experiencing trauma or adversity, it's an overexposure to stress hormones like cortisol, which are actually supposed to help you. But if it's a trauma or an adversity, it's prolonged, uncontrollable, and there's no relationships there to buffer and mitigate the effects of that stuff piling into the brain and body. So it literally can start to damage pathways. You might have children in your school who, year 5, 6, the year 5, they're fine. They have a divorce, or they move house and it's dramatic, or they're abused, or something happens and their behaviour will change quite often as a result of it. And that doesn't mean you don't have to go to extremes. You know, it might be something that seemingly from the outside looking in could be weighted as smaller, but I'm not assigning the weight to it there. That's perception of the outside world looking in. And it's the same for the resulting behaviour. It doesn't always present itself in big and outbursty. It can be the opposite, and quite often you can see children that are just withdrawing and coming within themselves and disassociating, for want of a better way of saying it. Still with me? Good stuff. Right, last one that we're going to go through is the bottom lens down at the bottom. That's anybody that's been born post 2000, because if you're born post 2000, you're born into a world where something's getting in the way of these things being connected. In over 95% of households, there is what?
Screens.
Yeah, technology. And it's the irony is not lost on me that I'm speaking on a Zoom call to some people in a different country, but the reason I'm referencing it at this point is because early brain development, you need people, not screens. Thousands of years, human beings have been on the planet. The last 30, this stuff has crept in and started to get in the way of the human interaction. Because we know, from what I've just explained briefly, very quickly, that these dots are connected by a social, physical interaction, and you can't get that through a screen. What I'm not doing is judging anybody. So if you're using technology with your own children, there's no judgment here. What we have to do, though, is make sure that we have an understanding of the impact that that can have. Because what you're seeing, if you want to label it as something, I suppose, is a technological interruption. Now, we were forced into this. We probably wouldn't be sat doing this as effectively if we'd not had those 2 years where we were forced into it. It was petrol on the fire. It was already happening. You'll recognise this, and without going off on a massive rant, you'll see the effects of this stuff in your classrooms and in the world. You'll see children that are maybe mislabeled as some of these other things that are on the screen, but actually just not had enough rough and tumble, tummy time, goo goo gaga, peekaboos, all that sort of stuff. Instead, I've been slammed in front of an iPad or an Xbox, and I'm not actually physically or emotionally developing the way that I should be. You can't get the same chemical releases through a screen as you can through those social, physical interactions. You can't figure out how to deal with emotion, look at what a model of a good emotion looks like through a screen. I'll give you some little daft ones to help you make my point, and then I'll move forward. If you were lucky enough to go on holiday when you were younger, what did you do in the back of the car on the way to the seaside or wherever you were going? You had I Spy, number plate game, mini punch, no return. You fought with your siblings, you sang songs, you sat and were bored. And even sitting, being bored, staring out the window is a very important thing to do, because it means that you're actually recognising a feeling and dealing with it. Now, you don't have to do that now. You feel something, whether it's good or bad. Your first instinct is get this and pacify. Look at videos of pigs in tutus on 4 different social media platforms, rather than actually recognise that feeling I'm dealing with is it, and what to do with it in a healthy way. Same with the positive stuff. Your first instinct is, right, let's get that on Instagram and see how many likes we can get for it, rather than sitting with it and doing something that's really healthy. It's the same, again, I'll give you the example. I'm lucky to get to go around. We were in a hotel with work once, and a family, you'll know exactly what I'm going to say, a family of 4 walked down. Every single member of that family sat staring at a screen. They didn't speak to each other once. It was really saddening for me. Like, the missing opportunities. One of the reasons, but not the only reason, you're seeing right down at the bottom ends of school, children coming in much less developed is because they're not developing as much, because there's this stuff getting in the way. Everything's instant as well. So the lack of delayed gratification and patience and all that sort of business is coming from this. If you want to watch a film now, you click a button, it's in front of your face on virtual reality or on whatever. Whether that's legally or not, it's there. If you wanted to watch a film and you were younger, you waited for a year, went to the cinema if you were lucky enough. If you weren't lucky enough, you waited again, and then you went to Blockbusters and queued up with people in a shop. And it sounds a little bit like he's banging the "ooh, when I were a lad" drum. But the point about that, those anecdotes I'm sharing with you there, just to make you laugh and giggle a little bit, is that they're all physical social interactions with people. What they're not is sitting staring at a screen. It does worry me a little bit that we will get to a point where we're so much more connected, but less connected with ourselves emotionally and physically, disconnected from each other. You might remember a time where community was, you knew everybody on your street, you leave your kids with your next door neighbour, all that sort of business. That's just not a thing anymore, which is sad. It's real sad. The effects of all that I'm talking about is you're getting a generation of young people that are wandering into education establishments that are ill-equipped to deal with their own emotions or social situations. So that's why it's important to use relationships with the school. That's why it's important for us to really recognise the benefits of hanging humans in those systems, making sure that they're not just cold and rigid. That's my argument against some of the extremes that are out there. Before I waffle into sort of the next section of this, because I'm going to whiz through a model just to give you an idea of what to do, Jacob, because all you've done is preach at us for the last half an hour. Has anybody got any comments on it? I'm always quite interested to see if anybody's got any comments about sort of systems and punishment, sanctions and technology in the brain. Has anybody got anything they want to add before I move forward?
Jacob, can I just ask a question? Because we've, from a little bit, a small amount of knowledge of neurodevelopment, you sort of look at early years, look at young children, and the first 3-5 years being, the formative, making the big, those neural connections being so significant, so that the stimulation and so on is working in the right way, so that you become neurotypical, using your term. What we're seeing now, post-COVID or post-confinement or rules or whatever, is it those kids that presumably were exposed to the right level of care, stimulation and human contact when they were between 1 and 5 years old seem to have unlearned some of that when they've reached adolescence. Is that do you think, technology?
I think that's a part of it, because everybody was at their certain stage during that part of history that's just happened. So if you were, so Luke, who you'll meet next time, if you ask him, he had a daughter in the pandemic, and she's developed very differently to his son that he's just had, who's now 1, because she wasn't exposed to anything other than his house and 1 or 2 other people. And for teenagers, not only have you got some of the stuff that we've talked about going off, but you also have stuff like what's called synaptic pruning, which happens at a couple of stages in life. And at teenage years, it's essentially the body getting ready for things like sex and other things. Being an adult is a bit of a broad term, but it's getting ready to do the other stuff. And if the phrase is like, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's literally sort of getting rid of the connections that it's not using. So there's an element of that in there, absolutely, which hopefully is tying up to the 2 things that you mentioned. But equally, if I'm a teenager, when my brain's supposed to be sort of learning and taking on all these different skills, and I'm sat staring at a screen because I've got to be, because there's no other way to do things, it's going to hinder me a little bit, absolutely. I know, again, through family and friends, teenagers that have avoided going to things like university or concerts because they've just been stuck in their house for 2 years, and the anxiety that's then created thinking about going and doing those things because they've not been exposed to them for 2 years. has really, really made it tricky for them. So I'm hoping that kind of answered the question a little bit. But yeah, absolutely. I'm talking across the board there, the impact, not just down at the bottom of development and children's age chronologically, but what you do, you're seeing the effects of it, of each age stage, sort of as they've sort of returned to wherever they're going, if you like, as we're moving forward. That's a really good question. Hopefully that answered it. Okay. I'm a bit of a fanboy of a guy called Bruce Perry. Now, I'm hoping some of you might have heard of his name before, and I'm kind of just going to meander through his model of that's called the neurosequential model with you very briefly, again, because I'm conscious of time, because that's what we kind of recommend to people. Generally, if we're doing training and support with a school, in whatever form, review, strategic, whatever, we've got this stuff that I've talked to you about so far, and then the next 3 elements weaved through whatever we're doing. The key bit, like I said earlier, is if you did the stuff we've just talked about, values, mindset, ethos, choices, all that stuff. If that's not right, none of the next bit will work. Now, Bruce Perry's neurosequential model is way more sophisticated. Again, he's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist from America. And if there's a book I would recommend to you, it would be his most recent book, which is called What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience and Healing. It's Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, as in Oprah Winfrey. And I listened to it as well as reading it. And if you can get past Oprah being Oprah, if that's not your thing, it's a very easy to digest. He's got another book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and that's quite heavy. It's still heavy, what happened to you, but it's conversational rather than case studies of really bad things. So his model is, if you look at the black writing, I'm pointing up here because you're on the screen in front of me, the black writing is regulate, relate, and reason, because that's the way that your brain and body works, hence the model that's on the screen. Regulate any sort of stress or dysregulation or discomfort. Relate, connect to the part of the brain that's responsible for emotion, attunement, and attachment and connection. And then reasoning, learning, that's all dealt with in the top part of your brain, the thinking brain. So what we do is we work through a model of those 3 things, and we look at stuff we can do to regulate. We explore stress, we explore body states of arousal, and things we can do to change the states, to regulate and manage behaviour of groups and children. We also look at, in the relate section, so the next bit, we look at things about language, communication, translating behaviour, and scaffolds of different kinds of language that you can use to really connect with somebody, make somebody feel heard, but maintain expectations and challenge, again, because this approach is not about being soft and fluffy. It's about being the adult, being in control, being boundaried and structured and routine, but doing that with a human element to it, doing that with relationships underpinning it, so that your structure and routine is received and connected to, rather than just thrown at children. And in that reasoning part, which is only achievable if you've got access to the top part of your brain, that cortical stuff is all about repair for us. So we actually use in our sort of training models, regulate, relate, repair, but in the official version, it's reason. Now, all that stuff up there is thinking, decision making, rationalizing, bits of memory, and we look at the restorative process in there. So we look at kind of rebuilding relationships and giving people the skills to deal with things differently next time. So we look through the restorative structure in a very scaffolded, skeleton way, so that people can understand, children and young people can understand how that thing made them feel and what they can do with the feeling next time. Because remember, if you draw yourself backwards a little bit into my sort of opening speeches, a lot of the behaviour that you'll see is that inability to be able to communicate that. So if I'm not helping them with that, if I'm just sticking the name in a circle or sticking them in a booth, they won't ever be able to deal with it differently in the future. So I'm keen to make sure that bit's done well and done right. It's hard, it's tricky, it takes time, 400 to 500 repetitions to create a neural pathway in the brain. So if I'm going to invest in this, you can't expect restorative practice to be easy or to happen or be successful overnight. It gets a bad rap, so does relational practice in the media, because quite often it's just not done well, and people replace the good things from the behaviourist approach, the structure, the routine, the rigor, the systems, with just restorative practice, and then obviously things will fall down. So regulating then, again, very quickly, because I am conscious of time, am I drawing at 1/4 or at 1/2, did you say, Shane?
Sorry, the session finishes at 1/2. If we could stop by about 20 past, so we've just got a little
Give me
bit
5 minutes.
So 5 minutes, yeah, perfect.
Is that all right? Right, like I said, up to this point, like the next 3 sessions, I'll probably do a 2-hour session on each. So you're going to have to bear with me if I'm glossing over these 2 little areas. Now, regulating for us, we explore what's called the window of tolerance, which I briefly referenced. Now, it's all about understanding different states of arousal and how the brain and body seeks what it needs. And you use things like pressure and repetitive rhythmic activity to regulate. You're all doing it now without even knowing. You're thinking, Jacob, what are you on about? But even the way that you sat, fiddling with a pen, leaning, I can see you there leaning like this. These are all like socially acceptable ways for your brain and body to stay in what's called the optimum state. You don't often find the child you're thinking of or that class turning up to you in an optimum state of arousal. They come back from break, buzzing, hyper-aroused, or they come into your class really flat and disassociated. And what we explore in regulated ways to support groups and individuals to kind of get back into the best state, ready to learn. I always challenge groups at this. I'm doing the regulate stuff, and I say, well, if you can put something into your day to make your day easier, like an activity at the start of the lesson that's going to get them in a better frame of mind, then you're not losing learning, you're gaining learning. You're not wrestling your group into maths or into that reading thing. You're settling them and regulating them so that they're ready to engage. So we would look through a lot of that. We talk about doing it with people first, so you can't learn to self-regulate until you've co-regulated properly. And again, I don't know if you've heard her, but my phone call, she is literally relying on my partner more than me, but my partner and us to soothe, regulate, and help her figure out what she needs, because she can't do it on her own. But that's the same with the 16-year-old. We've got to do it with them. We've got to model. They've got to use people. We use people as adults to regulate ourselves, and we've got something stressful happening. So we'd have a little look at what that means. We'd dive into sensory systems, which we're not going to do now, and we'd look at practical examples of how you can regulate somebody. Now, there's one thing that's not in that little section there, which I have referenced, which is the triune brain, which is understanding stress as well. Now, we would explore that in the first section, in the regulating part, if we were going to dive into that. But hopefully you can recognise that regulate section is all about getting somebody's lid on, calming them, and then you can start to connect them and relate. Now, this is a really good model, which I'm glad I've had a chance to just sneak in here, because I'm a bit obsessed with this one. It's called the social discipline window, and this is how we help people to really understand that it's not about being soft and fluffy. Now, up the left-hand side, or up the whatever axes, you've got expectation and challenge. On the bottom, you've got support. Now, depending on how much of each of those things you put into a situation will depend on, which box you fall into. You'll have a natural tendency. For me, if I'm stressed or the situation's really difficult, I'll probably lower my expectations and start falling into the 4 box. Some people, it'll be the other way. They'll start going into the 2 box. Then they start doing things at people. The goal is to try and work with as much as possible, like work with people, like don't do things to people or for people, children. But it's not always appropriate either. If somebody's about to run out in front of my bus, I'm not going to start trying to connect with them and attune to them. I'm going to shout, which would probably be pursued as challenging and expectation and probably be a 2-box response. This is the social discipline window, and if we had time, I'd dive into examples of how you can use it to analyse a piece of behaviour, how you can use it to plan something, to unpick something, to reflect on something. If I'm working with leaders to rewrite a policy, this goes in the middle of the table as a reflective tool for us. It's a very, very useful tool. Let me squeeze backwards. There's some scripts that we sometimes look at in the relate section, because a lot of the stuff in there is about language and communication. So making people feel heard and understood by reflecting, connecting. A good one is the WIN statement: wondering, imagining, and noticing. And then another really great one is connect before correct, which links wonderfully to that little PowerPoint slide of the social discipline window, and to the brain. If I connect to you before I impose my correction or my challenge, your lid is more likely to stay on. If somebody's sworn at me, if I say, God, you sound really angry, but remember we don't have that language in school, it's more likely that message is going to get to the right part. But if I do it the other way around, we don't have that language in school, but you sound really angry, it doesn't work, and it's more likely that little flip or that panel overspill or whatever metaphor you want to use. Now the last part, the repair, there we go. Hopefully you can still see that. I'm just flicking through just to give you the key bits. The last part is based on, like I said, the restorative process, which I'll really quickly give you. Now, there's 3 questions in a restorative process that are really key for us. And it's not all these ones here, although they're great. The really key ones for us are what's happened, how it's made them feel, and what they can do differently with the feeling next time. Because if you can get those 3 in, then you can start asking all these later on. But if you're not doing those bits, they'll never be able to manage that feeling or emotion differently. The key really is timing, so not rushing it, making sure they're ready. Where you do it's important. You can't just don't do it in an office over a desk or make it one person's job. Making sure that you're getting their side and that you're not focusing on your stuff as the adult, and giving them strategies. Now, what happened, why you did what you did as an adult, and linking it to feelings and emotions and giving them a strategy is the core of it all. So you could ask a question like, can you tell me what happened at break? And they might say, yeah, so-and-so stole my football, so I kicked him. And then you might say, well, we had to keep, to bring you in, to keep you safe, to keep so-and-so safe. When he kicked you, I'm wondering how it made you feel, because that's what the problem is. It made me feel angry. Well, the next time you're feeling angry, what can we do? And that's where you're starting to explore an accessible and achievable strategy with them. Because those are the key bits. You can't say to them there, next time you're feeling angry, can you come tell a teacher? Because that doesn't work. You don't do it as an adult. So, yeah, I'll pause there because there's just so much more that I'd love to pile into, but I am conscious of time. If anybody wants anything from me, I've got loads of bits and bats. I am conscious that you've obviously got a session with my lovely colleague, Mr. Mitchell. And you got Luke with you next time round, who will be primed and ready to take on some questions. But I believe that we're going to do a little bit of questioning now as well. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think actually there's a couple of ways that we can do this really. I mean, I think one of the things we could do is we could just maybe ask questions here. I can capture everything we've got actually that we've talked about on the Jam board. So I'm quite happy to probably pick that up and just have a go at doing that myself. But one of the things that would be good is what I will do after this event is I will put something on the feed in the digital network, and with just some questions. And actually, that might be the best way to think of questions that link from this one, Jacob, if you don't mind, into the one that Luke does. So we can say, actually, here are some of the things we'll talk about. And I can do like a brief sort of summary of those sorts of things, and then we can start adding questions ourselves along with the rest of the members. I do kind of have. Do you mind if I ask you a question? I mean,
go for it. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, I've only been working at whole education since September, and I was previously a behaviour lead in a secondary school for 7 or 8 years. Well, and spent a year working in a PRU last year, which was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it was one of the favourite things I've ever done. But one of the things, just picking up from you there, and I don't know whether this is indirectly that I've picked it up, is that talking about one of them is having a think about your systems, particularly probably in terms of them being helpful, but that's not the thing that's going to change it. So it's actually looking at the practice that we're doing, so the interactions with people and those sort of things. So is that probably something that I've just been picking up through your descriptions, the interactions?
Yeah, I think so. Don't worry about Michelle if you need to dip out. It's been great to have you. Thank you. I absolutely. There's some great quotes out there. I think there's a lady called Dr. Karen Treisman. She has a quote that's every interaction is an intervention. It really, Bruce Perry, the guy I've been banging on about for the last sort of 20 minutes, it's not what you know, it's how you are. you know, it's what you as a person bring into the system. It's the human that's within the classroom that is making the difference, not the laminated poster of expectations. They're important. You know, the system's important, but you've got to bring it to life. You've got to give it purpose and meaning. You've got to use you as an individual in your space or the individuals in your organization to really make that system work if you have a system. So I think that's a really important point. It's about the practice that's within that school setting, or if you're diving even further into it, in the system, if that makes any sort of sense.
Any questions, Robert or Luciana?
Yeah. I was gonna sort of make a comment on what was just been said. I think just listening, you can see the importance of this being a whole school approach, and I think that there's a few teachers that are they kind of already do this in practice without even realizing that's what they're doing. But then it's natural, yeah. But then for some, it doesn't come natural, and I think I don't know. I think what I'm realizing that there has to be a lot more consistent and continual training for those that it may not come naturally to, or those who've already got in their minds issues with certain students. You know, they've seen them in year 7, they're in year 10 now. That they've always had a tumultuous relationship with that student. Why all of a sudden they're just gonna start to become, you know, this sort of a person that this student can trust? They don't trust each other. There's this animosity that's been built up for years. Just a session isn't going to change that in a lot of teachers' minds. So I think it's something that has to be a whole school approach, but the training for the teachers and all members of staff of the school is not something that can just be done on a one-off. It has to be a continual thing, I think.
You've got to believe that everybody's got to believe and buy into it. And I've been lucky to, personally, been really lucky to sort of supported schools start their journey. And there's nothing more powerful than building a team from scratch, or, you know, even when you've got a team that's already been established for a long time, getting them all together, restarting and saying this, and creating a collective buy-in to something. And everybody's got it. You mentioned some bits there, like it really can't be just a one-off piece of CPD. This, you know, like it has to be part of your DNA for it to really work. And that's where I'm not buying into the media's version of X, Y, and Z, but it's where it's an easy target for people when it goes wrong, because if there is inconsistency or lack of understanding or clarity, and there isn't any purpose or intention behind any of the things that we've discussed over the last hour, it ain't going to work. It will be chaotic. It'll be messy and unsafe. But, and there's a big but, if you can get people clear on what you're trying to achieve with a really powerful vision and why, if you can get genuine understanding within your team and specialists there to prop it up, and you can get people then to start to build consistency, because that was one of the words that you used, with intention and purpose. It's magical stuff, and there's loads of places all over the country that are doing it. It's hard though, and that's the key thing. Like, it's so much easier for organizations to say one thing, do another, or to point blank do the other, and just selectively organize their environment to not even entertain the idea of another way of working, because they don't need to anymore, for want of a better way of doing it, and without sort of getting distracted by politics too much. Your point on consistency is really important, but that's you've got to get the skills. If I take you to the social discipline window really quickly, because what you're talking about there is somebody's strengths in challenge and expectation, and if you can get them to work on their support, because it's the other way for me. My natural is, my strength would be the bottom half of that, and I have to work in not just in challenging situations, but I have to work to really get my expectations and challenge up in situations. Otherwise, I end up doing things for people, either when I'm talking about my working nitty gritty, or if I was practicing as a teacher. If I stood in a classroom, my tendency would be to to drop the expectations and maybe not challenge as often, but potentially, if I wasn't practicing as well as I could be. So I have my focus, your focus for the person you might be thinking of might be, well, what can you or school do to create clarity, consistency, understanding, and how do you help that person to work on their support to help it match their really good levels of challenge or expectation? And the other thing that hit me from what you're saying is the repair stuff is for both parties. If they're as an adult not over the thing that's happened, they need to go through that process as well. It's not just about giving the child skills for next time. It's about rebuilding a relationship.
Absolutely.
I hope that.
No, yeah. It does. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. Unless Luciana, unless there were any questions from you. No, that's right. You're on mute. But
oh, sorry,
but I think you're saying no. Okay, yeah.
But it's really interesting for me because obviously I've come from primary and we've changed a lot based on. It's actually a lot of what you've been saying. Our behaviour system, I guess, is all based around relationships, and it's all about talking and providing our students. And being up in secondary and working with a different age group, it's very interesting for me to sort of see
it's
it.
Tricky.
It's okay. Brilliant. I've known them for a very long time. I've known them since I was 7, so we've got a bit of an understanding there. So it's quite good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great stuff. All right, and thanks, Robert, as well for those talks. I really appreciated that as well. Right then, Jacob. On that note, we shall leave it there. But thank you very much for that. Really insightful, absolutely brilliant, and we'll see everybody hopefully at the next one of these. All right, you take care.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Cheers.